They say love is strongest when tested, but not every heart that endures gets to stay whole. This is the story of David Miller, a man who gave everything, and the woman he gave it all for, Clara. David wasn't the kind of man you'd notice in a crowd. He didn't wear suits, didn't speak loudly, but he had that rare strength, the kind you don't see right away, the kind that holds families together when everything else falls apart. He worked at a small mechanic shop in East London. Long days, cold hands, the smell of oil under his fingernails. But at home, he was soft-spoken, gentle, attentive. Clara, his wife, was the opposite in almost every way. She was radiant, articulate, fierce when she believed in something. She had once studied art history and still carried herself like a woman born for gallery openings and opera nights, not the back room of a garage. But she loved David, or at least she had. They met when they were young, both volunteering at a charity shop. He fixed broken lamps, she curated the display window. He barely spoke, she talked enough for the both of them. And when she smiled at him, really smiled, he fell, fast, quiet, permanent. They got married in the spring, a modest ceremony, a borrowed dress. David cried during the vows. Clara laughed through hers. They rented a small flat above a laundromat. Friday nights were for takeout and old movies. She would run her fingers through his hair as he dozed off on the couch, and he would leave handwritten notes on the mirror every morning before work. Life was not easy, but it was theirs, and they held on to each other like they were building something sacred. But then came the illness. Clara fainted in the kitchen one morning. They thought it was just exhaustion, but the hospital told a different story. A rare autoimmune liver condition, aggressive, unpredictable. She lost weight, lost energy, lost herself. David transformed overnight. He took leave from work and learned how to inject medications. He bathed her when she was too weak to stand, cooked soup, held back her head during vomiting spells, slept sitting upright in a chair for months just to be near her. The hospital staff knew him by name. "You were here every day," they would say. He just nodded. There was nowhere else he could be. Every night, he whispered the same thing to her before she fell asleep.
"As long as you're still breathing, Clara, I'm still here."
And somehow the storm passed. She got better. Slowly, painfully, but she got better. Her cheeks filled out again, her eyes clear. Her hair, once dull and thin from the treatments, began to grow back, long, dark, and glossy, just the way she used to wear it. She stood taller, spoke sharper, started going out more. And David, he stepped back, gave her space to feel alive again. But the distance between them didn't close. In fact, it widened. She stopped laughing at his jokes, stopped noticing when he came home late. Her phone was always face down on the table, always locked, always buzzing. At first, David told himself it was nothing. He thought,
"She's just reclaiming her life. She's allowed to change."
but late at night, when he thought he was asleep, he could hear her typing, texting someone, and laughing. A soft, giddy laugh he hadn't heard directed at him in months. At work, she had grown close to a younger colleague, Ethan Clark. Charming, ambitious, always dressed like he was headed to a rooftop party. People talked, co-workers whispered, and David heard every word, even when they weren't spoken out loud. He started noticing how often Clara mentioned Ethan, how her voice lit up when she said his name, how carefully she dressed in the mornings now. Not for David, not anymore. The woman whose life he had once carried in his arms now looked at him like he was invisible, an old coat she no longer wore, a shadow she had outgrown. But David still held on, even when the cold crept in, even when her gaze turned away, because some men don't know how to stop loving, even when they're no longer loved back.
Some betrayals don't start with a kiss. They start with silence, a glance, a password changed. David Miller wasn't a jealous man. He never checked Clara's phone. He never followed her or questioned her freedom. Because trust, for David, had never been a performance. It had been his default, his foundation. But lately, something was off. It wasn't just the phone buzzing at odd hours, or the way she typed faster when he entered the room only to flip the screen face down. It was her eyes, how they no longer paused on him, how they seemed to scan past him like he was part of the furniture. She started staying later at work. Dinner grew cold more often than not. When she did come home, her face was flushed, not from the chill of London air, but from something else. David began to wonder.
What changed first? Her laughter, her perfume, or the part of her that no longer said, "I love you," without blinking?
One evening, she came home later than usual. He had set the table, a roast, her favorite. She walked in, glanced at the food, and said flatly,
Oh, I already ate.
"No apology, no thank you, just a shrug." David stood in the doorway long after she disappeared into the bedroom. The sound of the shower running, steam hissing from behind a closed door, and in his chest, a weight he couldn't name. That night, he lay beside her, eyes open in the dark. He listened to her breathing, steady and distant. He stared at the ceiling and wondered what was happening to them. And still, he said nothing. Because part of him hoped he was wrong. That maybe it was just stress. Maybe she was tired. Maybe love came back if you waited long enough. But then came the message. One night, Clara left her phone on the dresser, unlocked. She was in the shower. David didn't mean to look. He didn't want to. But the screen lit up, and the words hit like ice water down his spine.
Tomorrow's trip, just you and me. Can't wait to get away again.
No name, no emojis, just casual intimacy. The kind of message that says everything without saying much at all. David stared at the screen until it dimmed, and in that darkness, something inside him cracked. Not rage, not yet, just realization. He didn't sleep that night, didn't speak the next morning, but he waited, watched, and when Clara left the house with her suitcase and her perfect coat, David followed. He trailed behind quietly, past the train station, down a quiet street where no one would recognize them. And then he saw it. Clara, stepping out of a cafe, smiling, her hand interlaced with his. Ethan Clark. They looked like teenagers in love, laughing. Clara reached up and brushed a strand of hair from Ethan's face, a gesture so familiar it made David's stomach turn. He stood frozen across the street. He could barely breathe. But his legs moved on their own, across the road, through the crowd. He stopped, just feet away.
Clara?
She spun around. Her smile vanished. Ethan froze beside her. There was a long silence, long enough for everyone nearby to look away. Clara's lips parted, not to explain, not to apologize, but to laugh. A short, cold laugh.
You followed me.
She said, tilting her head.
Wow, David. That's low, even for you.
Who is he?
She looked at Ethan, then back at her husband.
He's someone who sees me. That's more than I can say for you.
David's hands clenched, not in violence, but in disbelief. This was the woman he had carried through hospitals, washed, fed, fought for. And now she stood before him, not with shame, but with pride. Clara leaned in slightly, her voice low, cruel.
You want to know the truth? I outgrew you, David. I got better. You didn't.
David didn't respond, not with words. He turned around and walked away. Because when betrayal speaks like that, you don't argue. You just break.
David didn't remember the walk home. His feet carried him through the gray London streets like a ghost. Inside his chest, something boiled, but it wasn't rage, not yet. It was betrayal, a hot pulsing ache, a feeling that everything he'd built had been mocked. Clara arrived home a few hours later. No suitcase, no excuses. Just a coat tossed onto the chair and the smell of a new perfume trailing behind her. David was in the kitchen, silent. Clippers on the counter. Not planned, just there. Maybe fate had placed them, maybe madness. Clara walked in, eyes glazed from wine or delusion, maybe both. She saw the tension in his face, the heaviness in his shoulders.
Are we really doing this, David?
She said casually, like it was a mild argument over dinner.
You following me was pathetic, but this?
She motioned to his shaking hands.
You're embarrassing yourself now.
David didn't answer. His voice had gone quiet in his own throat, but his eyes, they said everything. He wasn't speaking, because this wasn't a conversation anymore. This was the end of the illusion.
You gave up, David.
Clara snapped, raising her voice.
You buried yourself in tools and overalls and pity. I needed more. I needed to feel alive again.
He stared at her for what felt like hours, then whispered, barely audible.
And what did I need, Clara? You were dying, and I chose you. Every single day, I chose you.
He grabbed a kitchen chair, pulled it to the center of the room, gestured toward it, his voice low like thunder buried in fog.
Sit.
Clara blinked, then laughed. Not from humor, from disbelief.
You can't be serious.
Sit down.
David, don't be ridiculous, she said.
Said, stepping back.
You're not that kind of man.
But she was wrong. He wasn't that kind of man until she made him become one. Clara tried to move away, but David blocked her. He didn't yell, he didn't strike, but there was a force in him now, a man who had been broken and was now holding the pieces sharp side out. Clara's face changed. Anger faded. Fear seeped in. She sat, slowly, and that's when she saw it. The clippers, plugged in, buzzing softly on the counter.
David,
She whispered, her voice trembling now.
please, don't.
But David was already walking toward her, picked them up, turned them on. Clara began to cry, not out of vanity, but out of sheer disbelief.
Don't take this from me.
She sobbed.
It's the only thing I have left.
David stood behind her, looked at her reflection in the kitchen window. She was shaking, mascara running, shoulders heaving. He placed a hand on her head, then began. The first pass carved a line through the crown of her head. Thick, dark strands spilled over her shoulders, landing in her lap. The floor began to disappear under hair, under history. Clara screamed,
Stop. David, please. You've made your point. I'm sorry, okay?
but he didn't stop. Not out of revenge, not even out of rage anymore. He kept shaving, because it was the only thing he could do to make her feel what he had felt. Exposed, raw, stripped of identity. Each stroke revealed more skin, her scalp pale and trembling under the kitchen lights. The crying grew softer, then silent, until all that was left was the buzz of the clippers and the sound of hair brushing tile. When he finished, David turned off the clippers, let them fall to the floor. Clara sat frozen, her head shaved bare, her hands limp in her lap. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't speak, didn't move. And David, he didn't shout, didn't weep, he just stood there, chest rising and falling, staring at the damage both of them had created. In that kitchen, amid the silence and the hair, two people sat in ruins, not from violence, but from something worse. From the memory of love that had died and been buried under years of silence.
When storms pass, they don't always leave silence. Sometimes they leave wreckage. And sometimes the silence afterward is the loudest part of all. The next morning the house was quiet, too quiet. No kettle boiling, no footsteps on hardwood, just the creak of an old chair and the soft hum of morning traffic far outside the window. David sat in the kitchen, elbows on the table, staring at the floor at the strands of black hair that hadn't been swept. Clara was still upstairs, door locked, curtains drawn. She hadn't come down since he turned off the clippers and walked away. He should have felt relief, justice, even power, but what he felt was empty. Not like a man who had won something, but like a man who had finally proven how much he'd lost. Because here's the truth about betrayal. No one really wins, not even the one who walks away clean. Later that week, Clara returned to work. She had no choice. Rent was due. Life doesn't pause for shame. She wore a scarf around her head, neatly tied, stylish, almost confident. But it didn't fool anyone. People stared. Some whispered. Others avoided her altogether. Her hair, once her pride, once the first thing anyone noticed, was gone. And in its place was a story that no one had the full version of, but everyone wanted to fill in. Some said her husband had gone mad. Others said she deserved it. Most didn't say anything at all, just stared, let their silence finish the sentence. Ethan never came back. The man she had risked it all for, the man who promised weekend getaways and whispered excitement, he disappeared the second her hair hit the floor. One message.
This has gotten too messy. I think we should take some space. And just like that, she was alone.
Utterly, completely alone. Back at home, David stayed in the shadows. He went back to work, fixed cars, changed tires, did all the things he used to do, but now without feeling. The other mechanics noticed. He barely spoke, stopped bringing lunch, stopped shaving. They didn't ask questions. They just watched the man they knew slowly disappear. At night, David sat on the edge of the bed they used to share. Clara slept in the other room now. They didn't speak much, not because of hatred, but because they didn't know what to say to each other anymore. She hadn't apologized. He hadn't asked her to. They just existed in the same house, like strangers bound by a silent, terrible truth. There's a moment after everything is broken where you look around at the pieces and wonder if it's even worth trying to rebuild. But David didn't want to rebuild. Not anymore. He didn't hate Clara, but he no longer loved her either. Because love, when burned too many times, doesn't just hurt. It stops feeling like love altogether. It starts to feel like weight, like silence, like something trapped in your chest that you're too tired to name. One evening, David came home to find the kitchen cleaned, the hair gone, the floor mopped. On the table was an envelope. No dramatic goodbye, no apology. Just a note, in her handwriting. One line.
You were right. Some things don't grow back.
And she was gone. Just like that. He didn't chase her, didn't call. He just sat there, as the last light of day faded through the window, and the house finally returned to silence. They say hair grows back, that time heals all wounds, but not every wound scars on the skin. Some settle deep beneath it, where scissors can't reach, and regrowth never comes. Betrayal doesn't just destroy love. It takes everything that was sacred, everything that was real, and leaves behind something hollow. And no matter how much time passes, you will always remember the sound of the clippers turning on, and the moment love became something else. Some hair grows back, but trust never does.